The world's global temperature plummets by 100 degrees Celsius, and the Earth enters into an ice age era. Over a staggering 85% of the world's population die frozen, and after weeks of freezing, the world experiences a shutdown of all its infrastructure overnight. At this moment, a reporter on the news warns everyone to stay inside as the temperature continues to drop with no signs of stopping. But everyone shouldn't give up hope, because the government hasn't forgotten about them. As long as they unite and stand together, they will overcome this crisis. This news was cut off mid-speech as a plane freezes in mid-air and crashes right into the unfortunate reporter, killing him instantly, and the entire ordeal was broadcast on any television still working. Meanwhile, inside a building stocked with rations and almost frozen foods, someone with silent footsteps was creeping around with a bloody iron bat. The person was the tenant of the apartment, Han Fong. Suddenly, a female voice calls his name from outside his apartment, so as Han Fong peers through the hole in his door, he was surprised to see his school friend and crush Lee Hyuna. Hyuna was shivering in the cold, tears in her eyes, knocking on Han Feng's door. Han Fong, blushing profusely, immediately opens his door. It's already deadly cold, so as Hanning asks what Hannah was doing at his place, he also tells her to come inside, reminding her that it was dangerous and freezing outside. However, upon entering midway, Hyena suddenly grabbed the door and kissed Han Fong on the mouth. Han Fong was in a daze, and before he could understand what was going on, Hyena started playing with her tongue, then continued to suck on Pham dry with her mouth. This continued for quite a few minutes. However, as soon as the deed was done, a bewildered Han Fong, wiping his drool from his mouth, questioned what's gotten into Hyena. She kissed him. The second he opened the door, Hyena, with a seductive tone, whispered that she realized Han Fong was the only one she loved all along, and that act just now was the declaration of her love. "You're the only one I'm supposed to be with." And as the saying goes, it takes a near-death experience like this crisis to see a person's true colors, to see who they really are. Someone who would be there for you no matter what. Hyena said this in a hopeful and seductive voice, rendering Han Fong speechless at those words. He couldn't believe his goddess was finally noticing him as more than just a loser. He was so shocked that he just stood there, frozen on the spot and not responding. Seeing this, Hyena gently grabbed Han Feng's hand and placed it on her 38D bouncy melons, then whispered in Han Feng's ear, telling him that if he didn't believe her, he should feel her heartbeat. Also, she continued that she was willing to do anything, and I mean anything, that Han Feng wanted anything. This sudden revelation shook Han Feng's world. His heart was beating faster than his brain could comprehend what was happening. Is this really happening? Or is it all a dream? As Han Fong was lost in his thoughts, Hyena decided to make the first move herself. So with her hands seductively placed on Han Feng's ass, her leg was also placed in between his legs as well. Hyena then started to slowly rub Hanning's hot iron rod over and over again. At that moment, Han Fong started to vibrate like an old tractor's engine. His heart felt like it was about to explode at any given second. He finally replied that Hyena had no idea how much her words meant to him, and as he tried to continue, Hyena gently grabbed his face, whispering and insisting he needn't say anything. She knows and understands his true feelings for her. And now Han Fong knows hers as well. She requested Han Fong to close his eyes because she had a gift for him. As soon as Han Fong did, someone grabbed the door, and with all the might the person could muster, he smashed Han Feng's head. Blood splattered everywhere and his blood continued to gush out from Han Feng's head. Hyena and her real boyfriend checked out the supplies Han Fong had in his apartment. Meanwhile, Han Fong, lying on the deadly cold floor, started to go numb. He was unable to move his arms, his entire body, and slowly his vision became blurry. He couldn't believe this was the gift Hyena was referring to. I mean, how the fuck is this a gift? And to make matters even worse, Hyena and her boyfriend decided to get all nasty right in front of him. This was the reward Hyena was going to receive for her Oscar-worthy performance earlier. Her boyfriend said Han Fong couldn't believe what he was seeing to him. They were like devils. Han Fong swore that if there was a next life, he will never be a bootlicker again. Then suddenly something strange happened through the darkness. Han Fong saw a flicker of light ahead of him, and somehow he was being pulled towards it. As he got closer, the light began to shine brighter and brighter. Han Fong felt its warmth too. He extended his hand reaching for it. He thought it was the path which will lead him to heaven. However, as soon as Han Feng touched the light, it turned red, and suddenly Han Feng's entire soul started to burn. Then his soul started shredding into pieces, his screams echoing the silent abyss. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, Han Feng woke up, covered in sweat and completely exhausted. The first thing Han Feng saw and immediately felt was the warm sunlight coming through the window. Where am I? Han Feng was in a state of confusion as he continued to stare outside through his apartment window. And just like that, 30 minutes passed by like a bullet. Han Feng stood up, went to his balcony, and once again he continued to bask in the warmth of the sun. He never thought in a million years that he would ever feel this warmth again. Han Feng had checked the date, it was June 28th, and based on his memory from his previous life, the apocalypse onset was on July the 15th, days from now, and although he was supposed to be dead for some mysterious reason, he came back in time, just enough time before the apocalypse. This also meant he'd been reborn. His desperate wish was granted in his final moments. But enough about that. He thought there was something strange happening with Han Feng's body, specifically his hand. Ever since he woke up, his right hand was continuously glowing red, and he had no clue what it was or how to make it stop. According to Han Feng, it also didn't hurt or anything. It just felt a little bit warm, and as it doesn't seem to do anything. Han Feng thought he was imagining things at the beginning, but then in the middle of his thoughts, a heavy sneeze came out of him. When he opened his eyes, his red glowing hand had changed to green. What's going on? In addition, the green glow became bigger and bigger, freaking the shit out of him. Wasn't it troublesome enough that his right hand started glowing red, but now it was green? Seriously, what the actual fuck is going on? Han Feng became frustrated and confused with the beams of light shooting out of his hand. He wondered how science could justify his glowing color changing right hand. Soon after, the green glow shrunk in size, and it seemed like Han Feng could change the intensity of the green glow with his will, something he couldn't do with the red glow. But after a few minutes of failing to snuff out his glowing right hand, another serious issue came up. He immediately sat on his sofa. As his legs gave out, Han Feng started feeling like all his energy was leaving his body. He felt completely drained. Wait, is this because of the green light? Growing more and more frustrated, Han Feng shook his hand violently, trying to stop it from glowing. Damn it, what the hell is this thing? But suddenly his eyes widened when a thought came to his mind. Hang on a sec, what if I got a superpower? You know, like a cheat skill in Manhwa, that the protagonist of the story always seems to get well. With this newfound theory, Han Feng grabbed a kitchen knife, thinking if he held a weapon, some reaction might happen. But nothing happened. Oh, come on, seriously. But wait, something did happen as his stomach started to growl, making him feel like he would pass out any moment if he didn't eat something. Feeling defeated, he went to his fridge, and as he opened it to find something to eat, he realized that the entire fridge was empty. This was bad. If I don't eat something soon, I'm gonna pass out and probably die out of hunger. But at that very moment, Han Feng noticed a jar full of roasted soybeans. He remembered that it was a leftover snacks he had from before the apocalypse, and although it wasn't exactly a full meal, he was desperate. I mean, what else could he do? He decided to eat it first and then go to the supermarket. Later, Han Feng slowly grabbed a soybean and tossed it into his mouth. Immediately after, a loud boom happened. A second after, it was the soybean which had exploded in Han Feng's face, making the area all seem like a scene from a comic book. As the smoke cleared, there was fresh soybean plant in Hanning's mouth. Confused, he pulled the mysterious plant out of his mouth and noticed it was a fresh plant of a soybean. Also, he wasn't feeling tired or drained anymore, and the green light was gone too. Did it have something to do with the soybeans now? Han Feng was really confused. He plucked one soybean from the plant in his hand, and upon opening it, he was utterly stunned to see fresh soybeans inside. So this is my power. What an incredible discovery. I need to study it some more, but right now I have bigger fish to fry. I need to stock up on supplies before the world ends. Outside, the weather was very moderate as birds were chirping non-stop, and the buzzing crowd was evident to see. Soon all this will be ancient history. Han Feng thought he was in the crowd, thinking about everything that had transpired. Okay, so let me get this straight. First there was a red glow around my hand, then it turned green, then the green glow shrinks and grows, making my heart beat faster and feel super tired. Then the soybean I touched with my glowing green hand became a bean sprouts. What kind of power is this? After his recount, Han Fong was still confused and growing frustrated again. In the middle of his thoughts, an angelic voice called his name from behind. So as Han Fong stopped and turned back, well, it was none other than Miss 38D Melons La Hyena. She was wearing a beautiful dress and looking absolutely gorgeous once again, with a seductive voice. She said, "What a coincidence to meet like this. It's like the heavens are trying to bring us closer, heavens." Yeah, right. Han Fong looked like he'd seen a ghost after the incident. It seems Han Fong was now seeing her under a different lens. Li Hyena, the goddess of his dreams. For 3 long years, Han Fong had done everything to make her happy, even though he knew he was a loser, a fallback guy for her. But Han Fong never in a million years thought that this two-faced bitch would end up killing him. He was furious. His whole body was trembling with uncontrolled rage. Realizing this, Han Fong calms himself. Now's not the time for revenge. Not yet. After all, revenge is a dish best served cold. He needed to secure supplies first. In the middle of his thoughts, Hyena called Han Feng's name numerous times, but Han Feng was lost in his own world. Thinking, Hyena, pretending to be worried, asked if Han Fong was okay. Why is he spacing out? Han Fong with a nervous smile politely explained that Hyena was looking beautiful today, so her beauty made him space out. This compliment made Hannah blush, but right after that, a knowing smile crept on her lips, making her quite smug and also revealing who she really was. She continued her angelic act with a weird, seductive voice, offering that they go do some shopping together, now that they've run into each other. But Han Fong just straight up declines and left, saying he couldn't go today. Hyena was speechless at what just happened. She couldn't believe Han Fong would be on the path of a bootlicker counterattack. How could this bootlocker reject my offer? Meanwhile, Han Fong was proud of himself. He saw through Hyena's intention to use him as her personal ATM. After a while, Han Fong finally reached his desired destination, Waldemar, the city's Walmart and also the largest and most well-stocked supermarket in the East region. When the Ice Age hit, this place was cleaned out overnight, and nobody found out who was responsible. Han Fong had decided to stock up as much as he could before the apocalypse. With the aid of the internet, Han Fong searched for a survival guide for the ice apocalypse. He found a list of things he needed, which included food, winter clothes, medicines, and all the other necessary supplies and steps. But right now, the biggest problem was that Han Fong didn't have the money to stock up on all the supplies on the list. And although he had the ability to grow food, what good is it if he didn't have the food to grow in the first place? He was once again frustrated. Han Fong started cursing with any vile thing he could think of, but suddenly a familiar notification sound prompted him to check his phone. And when he did, he was startled. It was a message about a personal loan. Since Han Feng's credit score was great, he was eligible for a loan. Seeing this, a great idea immediately came to mind. Han Fong began to install every app that give personal loans. He smirked, knowing that there were plenty of ways to get a loan, and he wouldn't have to pay it back after the apocalypse, as money would be nothing but a useless piece of paper. Meanwhile, on the streets, a can was kicked by someone in a not subtle way. The person was no other than Hyena. She was absolutely furious with his bootlicker. Hyena was still stuck up on the fact that a loser like Han Fong ignored her. Han Fong was just one of her many sins. So how dare he denies her apathetic loser who didn't even have his own car. Hyena swore she would never play nice with Han Fong again. But at that moment a car horn startled her. So when she turned her head to the side, the car also stopped beside her as the SUV's window lowered. Hyena was surprised to see Han Fong inside. He even waved at her, dumbfounded. Hyena couldn't believe her eyes. She questioned if the SUV belongs to Han Fong. Yeah, I just got it, Han Fong said with a smile. He then continued that his dad had been killing it in his business in the US, so he wired him some money a few hours ago. He also just dropped his dad off at the airport. Hyena was still processing all this after realizing Han Fong was a great human wallet to have. Hyena's entire personality did a 180. She immediately got all emotional and sentimental, crying and apologizing, saying she was really sorry for asking Han Fong to go shopping with her that morning, when he was gonna pick up his dad from the airport. Hyena then made a cute and sorrowful face, as she wipes off her fake tears. She played the victim card, saying Han Fong was really cold towards her, that she thought maybe he was ditching her. His best friend silly girl Han Feng's entire demeanor changed when he said this. He was more confident and seductive. He gently grabbed Hyona's waist, pulled her close, and while holding her chin delicately, he said, "Would I ever ditch you? Hyena, you're the most important person in the world to me again." That mischievous knowing smile crept on her lips once more, showing her true nature. Then the Oscar-worthy performance was once more on display. Hyena pretended to be all shy, then cast her gaze on the ground, and said that Han Fong was also very special to her. Hyuna then proceeds to ask, why don't they go watch a movie and have dinner together at a high-end restaurant? Hyuna lifts her head up and asks what Han Fong thought about her suggestion. However, to her surprise, Han Foot was already gone. Who? Where did he go? The noise behind her made her turn back, and when she did, Han Fong was assembling all the supplies in the back of his SUV. He explained that he still had to carry all the stuff upstairs, so he can't today. He was obviously busy, even though Hyena was furious. Hearing this, she politely asked, "Did you buy so much stuff? What's inside the boxes?" Han Fong casually explains that they were nothing special, just some stuff he likes. That's all. Then feigning excitement, Han Fong said he also got a special gift for Hannah, and once he's less busy, they will meet up. This made Hyuna extremely happy, so as she turned to leave, she made mention that she was really looking forward to the gift. Hyena also said that she was heading home. Hearing this, Han Fong nonchalantly replied that she better do just that. With her back turned, Hannah reverted to her true self. Pleased, she was quite satisfied with herself, thinking she'd nailed it and got a great wallet at her disposal. On the other hand, Han Fong stole a cold glance from behind him, thinking he couldn't let Hyena find out about his little stockpiling. It's his ticket to surviving the apocalypse. After all, Han Fong couldn't wait to turn Hyona's world into a living nightmare. When the apocalypse hits she and the guy that helped in killing him, Han Feng's expression turned sinister like that of a grim reaper. He was actually starting to look forward to the apocalypse. The days rolled by, and that's why Han Fong had to prepare before that very day. He needs to stock up on enough food supplies, but he couldn't let his neighbors suspect his sudden hoarding. So Han Fong had his packages sealed in hazardous boxes, and the sensitive supplies like medical supplies are moved by Han Fong at night when no one's around. So with those issues sorted, the next issue was electricity. After the apocalypse hits, the power grid will be extremely unstable. So Han Fong got a generator and enough fuel to keep it running for at least a year. Also, the heating system will stop when the apocalypse hit. So Han Fong modified his house for independent heating, and also reinforced his doors and windows while he was at it. He also dedicated an entire room for storing his supplies too. By the time he finished getting everything ready, it was already July 14, and the beginning of the apocalypse was the very next day. Finally, it was time for the main event, and thus discovering the mystery behind how his power.
We saw how the main character Han Fong had to prepare before that very day. He needed to stock up on enough food supplies, but he couldn't let his neighbors suspect his sudden hoarding. So, Han Fong had his packages sealed in hazardous boxes, and sensitive supplies like medical equipment were moved by Han Fong at night when no one was around. With those issues sorted, the next problem was electricity. After the apocalypse hit, the power grid would be extremely unstable, so Han Fong got a generator and enough fuel to keep it running for at least a year. Also, the heating system would stop when the apocalypse hit, so Han Fong modified his house for independent heating and reinforced his doors and windows while he was at it. He even dedicated an entire room for storing his supplies. By the time he finished getting everything ready, it was already July 14, and the beginning of the apocalypse was the very next day. Han Fong knew that to survive in the upcoming Ice Age apocalypse, relying solely on the supplies he'd accumulated wouldn't be enough. He needed a long-term solution, and the key was to find out more about his power to manipulate plants. After all, it was his last hope. Han Fong had cooked the soybeans he grew and decided to eat them to check if they were edible. Staring nervously at his spoon full of cooked soybeans, Han Fong hesitated, and rightfully so. He had no clue what to expect if he ate it, but Han Fong knew that if he didn't try, he would never know. With his ability acting so randomly, it was difficult to figure out its triggers. So as he took a deep breath, Han Fong took a bite. To his surprise, it was edible. Not only that, it also tasted just like any normal soybean. In fact, it was so delicious that Han Fong finished half his plate before he even realized it. After confirming that he could now produce food, the next step, Han Fong thought, was to figure out how this ability of his actually worked. So far, he'd only tried it on soybeans. Han Fong opened his fridge, which was now fully stocked with all kinds of food. He decided to test if his ability also worked on other plants. Hours passed just like that, and before he even realized it, the sun had already set. Han Fong found it difficult to open his eyes, and when he eventually did, he questioned if he had passed out. He was also holding a fresh vegetable in his hand. Han Fong's head was spinning, and he felt extremely exhausted. It seemed this power took a serious toll on his mind and body. So, to replenish his lost energy, Han Fong decided to finish his plate. As he was eating, so far, he had learned something new about his ability. As he continued to stare at his right hand, he recollected his progress. Before Han Fong had blacked out earlier, he had tried using his power on a bunch of different plants. Some vegetables didn't react at all. Some grew from seeds to fully grown plants, just like the soybean seeds. And some, well, they just exploded in Han Fong's face. But the weirdest aspect of it was that after the explosion, they turned into a coal-like substance that was extremely light. Seeing this, Han Fong decided to try heating it, and voila! He found out that it could be used as regular coal, which made Han Fong extremely pleased with himself. This meant he wouldn't have to worry about staying warm forever. Afterward, he tried many more times, but the success rate was extremely low. However, Han Fong started to notice a pattern. When he remained calm and focused, there was some reaction. So, he tried to remain calm and focused when activating his ability, and to his surprise, a fresh broccoli grew instantly in his hand. This was when Han Fong passed out immediately after. Back to the present, Han Fong was contemplating. He couldn't find any significant patterns at all, but he knew deep within him, like a gut feeling, that there was definitely some kind of principle behind how his ability worked. Han Fong placed the fresh broccoli on his table and sat in the lotus position, trying to meditate. He imagined himself out in nature, standing naked, making his mind and body a part of nature. As Han Fong slowly opened his eyes, he was delighted to see that it was a success. Ability was directly connected to his consciousness. Then, he decided to use it on some fresh, juicy meat. Han Fong picked out a fresh, juicy piece of meat with his glowing green hand, expecting it to grow. There was no reaction. He tried meditating while holding it again. Nothing happened. Then, he remembered. When he was meditating, he could sense two distinct colors, and he hadn't even tried using the red color yet. This prompted him to once again close his eyes and try to summon the red light. Several minutes passed, but nothing happened. Then, finally, after what seemed like forever, the red light activated and started covering the whole piece of meat. Han Fong opened his eyes moments later when he smelled something odd. Immediately upon opening his eyes, he was disgusted. The meat looked spoiled, to the extent that just the smell was enough to make him want to puke. He threw the meat on the floor, but after a while, curiosity got the best of him, and he came back to check what the meat had really turned into. Han Fong was a little disappointed. Upon close inspection, the meat actually looked like it had been cooked, or was close to being rotten or something. Seeing this, Han Fong thought to himself, is this all the red light could do? Heat things up like this? No, there has to be more. The meat looked like it had gone through a disintegration process. The word disintegration sparked an idea in Han Fong's head, so he immediately grabbed some soybeans in his right hand, then activated his green light. In his left hand, he held the meat covered in the red light. Han Fong thought, if my guess is correct, then the green light represents the evolution of matter, and the red light represents the opposite, which is disintegration. So what if I combine them? Hey, quick fact, 97% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It's free, helps the channel grow, and keeps you in the loop. Thanks for your support. As soon as he did, Han Fong exclaimed in surprise, his eyes bulging out like they were about to fall off. The small, low-quality meat grew almost 5 times its size and turned into premium-looking meat. Dumbfounded, Han Fong was confused about what had just happened. He had casually merged both lights, not knowing the result would be like this. Also, the soybean in his left hand was gone. Did it merge with the meat? Han Fong checked the meat up close, smelling and tasting it, but the meat looked, felt, and smelled exactly like real meat. It was even somehow fresher, like premium meat. Beaming with excitement, Han Fong decided to try this one more time, but he ended up ruining all the meat, which made him beat the floor over and over again in frustration. Having had enough, Han Fong thought he would just have to figure it out later. He stared at his glowing hands and thought his day had been really productive since he had figured out a bit about his abilities. He knew that if he mastered his power, he could become the only man standing at the pinnacle of the imminent apocalyptic world. But just as he was daydreaming, another thought came to mind that froze him on the spot. Han Fong had forgotten about weapons. He immediately packed all the food back into a box. But in the middle of his packing, it started to snow outside. It's here, Han Fong thought. It was finally happening. The apocalypse had started. It was really happening. After that, Han Fong, now wearing warm clothes, was walking down the streets, deep in thought. In just a few hours, the entire street was being covered with snow. Han Fong knew the temperature would drop below -45 °C within the week. However, Han Fong wasn't bothered about such matters. He needed a gun, and although buying a gun was illegal, Han Fong couldn't even buy one if he tried. He didn't have any connections to get one. Just then, a sharp voice pierced Han Fong's ears. The source of the voice belonged to a young man with an exaggerated fashion style, acting all high and mighty with no actual work to do. He was always roaming the streets aimlessly. Everyone knew him as Homeless Joe, but his real name was Lee, and the people around him called him Brother Lee. Lee lived in the same neighborhood as Han Fong. Lee was reputed to be in charge of big construction projects and seemed to know everyone around. But the truth was, he didn't have a proper job. He always claimed to be busy. The only thing he had was some connections with big shots and even gangsters, and that was the only reason Han Fong thought of him. He was the only man Han Fong knew who could get guns for him. So, with a nervous look, Han Fong called his name, waving as he did so. But when Lee turned his head to look at Han Fong, his face was filled with annoyance, like he had been interrupted in a huge business meeting. He asked if he knew Han Fong. Han Fong explained that they had met a while ago and lived in the same neighborhood. Lee, acting bored, said he was pretty busy, so Han Fong shouldn't blame him for his bad memory. "Anyway, what can I do for you?" Lee asked. Han Fong immediately looked from side to side and, after confirming that there was no one around, came close to Lee and whispered in his ear, asking if he had ever dealt with guns. This shocked Lee greatly, so he asked why Han Fong needed a gun. Han Fong remained silent for a while, feeling uncertain. Guilty at seeing Han Fong's silence, Lee assumed Han Fong was planning something illegal with the gun. He warned him not to try any funny business, saying, "Guns are dangerous, and although I've got connections, I'm not going to help you get entangled with anything risky." But on the spot, Han Fong came up with an excuse. He explained it wasn't what Lee was thinking. He only needed the gun for self-defense. A flashback shows a day not long ago when Han Fong was riding his bike to work and ran into an old man who was spitting everywhere. The man spat right on Han Fong's face. Han Fong confronted him, insisting he apologize, but the man spat on his face again. Furious, Han Fong gave him a good beating. As the old man left, he said he'd get back at Han Fong, and sure enough, the very next day, the same old man came back with his gang and attacked Han Fong. Still, to this day, whenever they saw Han Fong, a beating would soon follow. His life had become a living hell. He had never been so humiliated. That's why he needed the gun for self-defense. Seeing Lee getting all worked up and angry surprised Han Fong. He didn't expect this cliché story to work, let alone to this degree. Lee grabbed Han Fong by the shoulder and told him, "Say no more. From this moment onwards, your big brother Lee's got you covered." Lee proceeded to tell Han Fong that he would make sure to fulfill his request. Now, Han Fong just needed to follow him to the bus stop so they could hop on. Lee told Han Fong that his Mercedes was in service, so they would need to make do with the bus. Han Fong expected this, so he wasn't surprised. Although Lee was a big talker and liked to bluff, he wasn't a bad person. Han Fong then took out the keys to his SUV, telling Lee not to worry about it. He had a car. Seeing this, Lee couldn't help but be surprised. Soon after, the two were in the SUV, and as Han Fong was driving, Lee was really impressed. He didn't think Han Fong was rich. Lee immediately took out his phone and started taking pictures, posting them on social media, boasting about driving his new car. Finally, after a while, they reached their destination. From the looks of it, people on the streets were already feeling the cold, making fires to warm themselves. As soon as Lee got out of the SUV, everyone around him came close, surprised and shocked, asking what business he had there. And what's with this SUV? How much was it? Hearing this, Lee casually said, it's nothing much, just 700 grand, give or take. Meanwhile, Han Fong was speechless. He thought it was bold for Lee to claim ownership of the car right in front of the actual owner. As they went inside, the boss, who was leisurely sitting on his sofa, asked Lee what he was doing there at a time like this. Lee, a little nervous, first offered Boss Lu a cigarette, then introduced Han Fong, saying he wanted to buy a gun. Hearing this, Boss Lu took a quick look at Han Fong, sending chills down his spine. "That's it? A lousy gun? I thought you were bringing me something interesting," Boss Lu said with a smirk. He then told one of his men, Shang, to give Han Fong a handgun. "The price is 6 grand, Boss Lu said nonchalantly. Hearing the mention of a handgun, Han Fong, still nervous, asked, is it possible to get something a little longer? You know, like one with a scope?" Hearing this, Boss Lu paused, staring at Han Fong, who began to sweat bullets. Then a loud roar echoed through the entire room. "Kid, are you asking for a freaking sniper rifle? Do you think this is a shopping mall where you can just order anything you want? Take the damn handgun or leave it." Lee, seeing the boss so worked up, immediately jumped to Han Fong's side, spinning a tragic tale to justify his request. "You don't know this, boss," Lee started, "but Han Fong's had a rough life. His ex-wife, she had 3 kids, and none of them were his." As the story unfolded, Boss Lu's eyes widened with every detail. By the time Lee finished, the boss was livid, slamming his hand down on his desk. "What kind of vile woman does that to a man?" he roared. The sudden outburst startled Han Fong, who could barely believe what was happening. Somehow, Lee's completely fabricated story had worked wonders. Boss Lu, now fully invested in Han Fong's made-up misery, had a change of heart. "You know what? I'll get you that sniper rifle," he declared. Han Fong was speechless, realizing how ridiculous the situation was. His obvious fake stories had somehow convinced them both. "Thank you, Boss Lu," Han Fong said, genuinely surprised by how things had turned out. Boss Lu waved his hand dismissively and instructed Shang to check if they had a semi-automatic rifle in stock for Han Fong. As an unexpected gesture of generosity, he also gave Han Fong a loaded handgun as a gift. This act of kindness stunned Han Fong, who was still on edge but grateful. Feeling the need to share more vital information, Han Fong mentioned, "I've got a friend who works for the government. He told me there's going to be a major food shortage soon, due to the unusual weather. It might be smart to stock up while things are still available." Boss Lu looked skeptical at first, but Han Fong's serious demeanor made him reconsider. "All right," Boss Lu said, nodding, "I'll think about it. Now get out of here. Seeing Lee's face is annoying me." Once outside, Lee couldn't help but start bragging. "See how I handled that? Beautifully, right? If it wasn't for me, you'd be done for. I bet if I'd asked Boss Lu for a cannon, he would have given it to us." Han Fong smiled and thanked Lee. As a token of gratitude, he promised to grab him some cigarettes on their way back. "Don't be silly," Lee replied, pretending to be humble. "I don't need cigarettes. I just like helping people out. But if you insist, I like the Hui brand. The other ones make me choke. And hey, once I get paid for my next project, I'll pay you back and take you to a nice sauna." Han Fong tuned out Lee's bragging and empty promises as his mind wandered. With weapons and supplies secured, he felt somewhat ready for the early stages of the impending apocalypse. All that was left was to refine his ability, which would be key to his survival. If he could fully master it, his chances of thriving would skyrocket. Just as Han Fong was lost in thought, his foot slipped on the icy ground. Before he knew it, he did an awkward backward flip, his shoe flying off in the process, and landed hard on the ground, groaning in pain. Holding his foot, he realized it might be broken. Trembling from the pain, Han Fong handed his SUV keys to Lee. "Take me to the hospital," he pleaded. But Lee, nervous, replied, "I don't have a driver's license. I can't drive." Frustrated, Han Fong could barely speak. Lee, panicking, tried to lift Han Fong onto his shoulder but struggled, looking like he had just eaten raw peppers and was about to pass out himself. Han Fong, still in pain, was utterly speechless at the absurdity of the situation. Snowstorm outside worsened by the minute. It was freezing, and the whole town was enveloped in heavy snow. By the time they reached the hospital, the walls were covered in ice, and inside, the nurses were anxiously watching the deteriorating weather. As the emergency phone rang, one of the night shift nurses, whose figure rivaled that of a model, hurried to the hallway to respond to a call. In the other wing of the hospital, Han Fong lay in a bed, groaning in pain. The X-ray confirmed his fears. His leg was indeed broken. After a close examination, the physician diagnosed a stable fracture on Han Fong's right tibia, ensuring he'd be out of commission for quite some time. Of all the times for something like this to happen, it had to be right before the apocalypse was about to begin. Just then, his phone rang. It was Lee. He said he had to leave to close some deals, but told Han Fong to call if he needed anything. Sighing, Han Fong gave him a thumbs up, signaling he was fine, though he couldn't shake the frustration. Looking around the hospital, Han Fong noticed just how busy it was tonight. The city hospital was packed with patients, many of them victims of accidents caused by the sudden blizzard and plummeting temperatures. Emergency beds lined the hallways, a grim reminder of how bad things were getting outside. As Han Fong glanced left and right, wondering how long it would be until he could get his medication, something caught his attention, a sight that made him momentarily forget his surroundings. His gaze was drawn to a nurse across the hall, Nurse Jean, the head nurse, who was attending to a severely injured patient. Han Fong couldn't help but stare, his face reddening slightly. Nurse Jean wasn't just highly skilled and professional, she was also strikingly beautiful. Her delicate features, combined with her clear expertise and calm demeanor, captivated him. She had everything going for her, a sharp mind, compassion, and a disarming beauty that seemed effortless. But Han Fong wasn't the only one who noticed. An older man sitting nearby suddenly called out to Nurse Jean, claiming he had an emergency. Jean, ever polite, rushed over, apologizing for any delay due to the hospital being short-staffed. "Can I come by a little later to help you?" she asked gently. But the old man insisted, saying his back had been hurting more than usual. Unbeknownst to Nurse Jean, the old man had sneakily taken out his phone, positioning it to record her. He then asked if she could take a quick look, but Jean, maintaining her professionalism, explained that an X-ray would be needed to diagnose any real issue. The old man pressed further, insisting she take a look now, and even went so far as to grab Nurse Jean by the waist. She, visibly uncomfortable, politely tried to disengage and told him to wait for the physician. Emboldened by her discomfort, the old man moved his hand lower, clearly intending to cross another line. But just as his hand inched toward her, something flew through the air, a bedpan, and struck his arm with a loud clang. Then bam! Seconds later, the old pervert was seen on the floor groaning in pain. Seeing this, Nurse Jin asked the old Greer if he was okay, but Han Fong appeared at the scene apologizing for hitting the old man with his crutches. He claimed it was his first time using them. Han Fong then bent down and took the old man's phone, claiming he was checking whether it was broken. This immediately alarmed the old man, who told Han Fong not to touch his phone, but it was too late. Han Fong was already checking the content displayed on the screen. His expression became dark as his entire presence was dim with an ominous aura. He didn't even notice that the bandages on his leg had loosened and fallen off. Everything was just as he suspected. This old geezer got some nerve filming up a nurse's skirt and even molesting her in public. Han Fong showed the old man the video and asked for a good reason why he shouldn't call security and have them escort the old man to a police station where they love perverts like him. Hey, quick fact, 97% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It's free, helps the channel grow, and keeps you in the loop. Thanks for your support. Han Fong told the old man to scram and that he shouldn't dream of getting his phone back. Also, the next time Han Fong saw his creepy face, everything he did was going straight to the internet. Hearing all this, the old man could do nothing but grit his teeth in frustration. Then he quickly made a mad dash for the exit, running as fast as his old legs could carry him. Seeing this made Nurse Jean shout for the old man to wait. She was confused about the old man's sudden display of energy. Didn't he say his back hurt? How could he run off so quickly? Hearing this, Han Fong was utterly speechless, his mouth wide open, highlighting what he was witnessing. He couldn't believe it. There couldn't be people this naive in the world, could it? Han Fong showed Nurse Jean the evidence of the old man's sudden actions. Nurse Jean was genuinely shocked. She wondered how she didn't notice anything. Han Fong gave Nurse Jean the phone, telling her to decide whether she wanted to wipe the evidence or call the cops, whichever made her feel better. However, she should be more careful from this day forth, so perverts like the bad people don't take advantage of her. Hearing this, Nurse Jean gave her usual radiant smile, thanking Han Fong. Also, she'd been meaning to ask Han Fong about the issue with his leg. Wasn't your ankle injured? The way the question was asked sent a chill down Han Fong's spine, and as he remembered, he had a broken leg. All the pain that was masked by his urge to protect Nurse Jean came flooding in like a broken pipe. Seconds after, Han Fong's screams could be heard across the hall. Nurse Jean expertly rebandaged Han Fong's leg, and still with that radiant smile, asked Han Fong if it still hurt. No, not at all. Han Fong thanked her with vigor. Nurse Jean assured Han Fong that she'll never let such bad people get away with such behavior anymore. Hearing this, Han Fong just told her to be more aware of her surroundings and she would be fine. And to put it to a check, he lifted his injured leg to have a feel of those divine melons. And to his horror, Nurse Jean was not aware at all. Not even a little bit. She just says she will be more attuned to her surroundings. But at that moment, another nurse called for her. Nurse Jean was needed elsewhere. So as she got up to leave, she reminded Han Fong not to forget to come back in a week's time to get his ankle checked a week's time. I guess I won't be seeing her again. Han Fong thought of this as he got up, grabbed his crutches and left the hospital scene. The very next day, the snowstorm got even worse than before. It was becoming more and more difficult to even take a walk outside every channel. Was interrupted with an urgent news. It was announced that all regions in the country was experiencing the same icy weather, and other countries worldwide was no different. However, experts and specialists from 46 other countries have all gathered at UN to discuss the weather's anomaly. But one thing was certain. According to their experts, the snowstorm won't last long, so everyone should follow the guidelines issued by the government and refrain from hoarding supplies and spreading rumors. However, Han Fong, enjoying a glass of premium wine in his apartment while listening to the government's misinformation, thought it was typical for them to do so to keep their citizens from panicking. If Han Fong hadn't been reborn, he would have also believed in the pile of crap they were spouting anyway. He was prepared this time around. His supplies were fully stocked, and his house was reinforced to withstand almost any form of breaking, and has its own heating system. He needn't worry about his survival for a long while at that moment. A ding sound brought Han Fong from his reverie, and as he checked his chat group for the housing complex reside of his building, almost everyone was delighted with the current situation the world was facing. They were glad to be laying around without going to school or work. However, one message got Han Feng's attention. Someone with the chat name of Mysterious Person had announced that the Ice Age apocalypse was about to begin. Han Fong, with a surprised look, questioned himself how the person knew about the apocalypse. It looks like Han Fong needs to be mindful of this mysterious person. Reading through the comments, the property management team was under constant pressure from the tenants to go shovel the snow outside. And although it was minus 20 degrees outside, the tenants didn't care and wanted to take their cars to the supermarket to get supplies. Inside a 3D version of the group chat, there was uproar. Everyone was arguing about procuring supplies since they didn't know when the weather will revert to normal. The tenants are protesting for the property managers to show themselves. They demanded an explanation as to why they haven't shoved the snow outside the apartment complex. Seeing the angry mob, the management team apologized, saying there wasn't anything they could really do in this snowstorm. However, the tenants still didn't care. What's the point of paying them if they couldn't handle such a small matter? If the property managers couldn't help them, then they demanded a refund on the fees that they had been paying them until now. Among the crowd was Han Fong, who scoffs at the absurdity of the situation. He knows that this crisis was beyond the control of humans, so the current argument was completely meaningless. One of the residents steps up and tries to calm everyone down. He states that the snowstorm was so heavy that even if the property managers try to clear the snow by themselves, it will just be covered again in a few hours. He then suggests that they all work together to clear the snow. If they had done that, instead of fighting, they would have been able to go out long ago. After all, the property managers were humans, just like everyone present. There was really nothing they could do in this kind of disaster. He then questions if everyone was just taking their frustration out on them. Hearing this, some of the residents question why they were the ones being lectured. Why was the person speaking on behalf of the property management team? Was he the owner? They have been paying the property managers for such situations like this. So why should they waste their energy helping? However, Glasses Man replied that he wasn't speaking on behalf of the property management team. He was speaking objectively and realistically. Besides, driving a car to the supermarket was impossible. And even if they do manage to clear the roads in their neighborhood, who could guarantee that the roads outside were also cleared? Hearing this, the angry tenants asked Glasses Man what they should do. Then upon hearing this, Glasses Man was delighted, so he proceeds to suggest that they walk to the supermarket. If everyone present agrees, he will personally go outside with the property management team to clear a footpath for everyone. It was in that moment that Han Fong seemed to have some recollection of Glasses Man. His name was Zhang, and if Han Fong remembers correctly in his previous life, Zhang was a very lively person, and that's it. That's all he remembers seriously. But at that moment, another user cuts in saying the matter at hand wasn't complicated. So why was everyone making it such a drag? Those who want to go outside should just clear the roads, and the ones who aren't should just shut their bitches up. Fighting for half a day just to clear some snow was very annoying. His disinterested attitude on the matter was evident to see, so he immediately logged out as quickly as he logged in, leaving everyone speechless as brief silence ensues. Another user commented that he will also head outside to help. He wants the roads cleared quickly because he needed to help his good brother down the streets to discuss business worth millions. Han Fong immediately knew who the person was. After all, there was only one person who spoke in such a manner, Lai Zi. Following Lai Zi's volunteering service was a few others who also agreed to go shovel snow outside just as the discussion was nearing its end. Another user stole the spotlight, raising her hand as well. She also wanted to shovel snow outside, but added she might be physically weak compared to everyone also. She had had a flu for the past 2 days, but Brother Zhang had set an example, so she was willing to help. However, she can. Han Fong, knowing firsthand the cunningness of a user, wondered if she really intended on going in the first place. Hearing that Hyona was willing to go do shoveling, all of her Sims hopped in as well, saying that they are willing to cooperate. They were so many ambled men, so how can they let their goddess shovel snow? She should just stay home, rest well, and recuperate. Iona thanked everyone for their concern, since they were insisting she will have to trouble everyone and do what she had been told. Here is the text you sent. Han Fong logged off, irritated by the bit's acting. He can't help but admit that Iona is really good at catching people's heart. Even he was a victim of her act once upon a time. And speaking, if the devil Li, Iona messaged Han Fong at that moment, asking what he has been up to lately. She also made mention that Han Fong promised her that he would contact her, so she's been waiting. Hyona then asks Han Fong a favor to go get her some supplies, then proceeds to send him a seductive selfie wearing too little, despite the cold. Han Fong noticed this after all. It was Hyona's usual tactics to get her bootlockers to do her bidding. Han Fong contemplated on how to reply her, and from the looks of it, Han Feng's reply made Hyona's poor phone face her wrath. She was really pissed with Han Feng's sudden path of a bootlicker counter on the 3rd day. Since it started snowing, the temperature was -20 degrees. In the early stages of the apocalypse, everyone still had the central heating system running, and the internet was still up and running, so everyone was living their lives as usual. Meanwhile, Han Fong was bored just on the 2nd day, and he was already bored to death. He had been scrolling through numerous videos for 3 days. It seems Han Feng's biggest problem during this apocalypse was to learn how to endure loneliness, and his broken leg wasn't helping either. It needed at least a month to make a full recovery. Not having better things to do, he decided to continue scrolling through random videos where he came across some news about the power of self-recovery. In the video, the doctors sewed up the wounds of a patient who jumped off from the 15th floor of a building after sewing. They discovered that the patient's damaged internal organs and bones had started to regenerate. This miraculous news gave Han Fong an idea. He remembered that he had an ability that promotes growth. "Why didn't I think of this earlier?" he said. Han Fong activated his green light, reached out and placed his hand on his broken leg, wondering if there will be some kind of effect. He poured everything he got into this little experiment, and as the green light dissipates, Han Fong waited for any signs of effect. But nothing, absolutely nothing occurred. Seeing this, he laid comfortably on his sofa. Feeling a bit disappointed, he thought that the green light would be able to help him recover his injury faster. Suddenly, drowsiness hits him hard, and after a single yawn, Han Fong was out cold in his sea of consciousness. He dreams he was wearing some tribal outfit while riding a mountain goat. And from what it seems, he was also traveling with the herd of goats. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments.
Han Fong was out cold in his sea of consciousness. He dreams he was wearing some tribal outfit while riding a mountain goat, and from what it seems, he was also traveling with these herd of goats. Among the herd, there were some that even flew. Behind him was the herd, as they also picked up the pace directly on the ground and in the air. So as the smacking continued, the goat Han Fong was riding was clearly displeased, and in the next moment, it tossed Han Fong off, sending him flying. He had struck his ankle on the ground and was in excruciating pain. When Han Fong thought his ankle was shattered, the goat cautiously approached him and began licking his injured ankle as he moaned and trembled uncontrollably in agony, unable to move. Han Fong patted the goat's head as a thank you, even though he was appalled by what the animal had done. However, this just made the goat angrier, as seen by the irritated expression on its face as it looked at Han Fong. It then extended its tongue several meters long and wrapped it around Han Fong's leg, and as it raised the injured leg in the air, spreading Han Fong's legs wide open in the process, Han Fong screamed in shock. Seconds later, the wrapped tongue of the goat started to glow green, and as its saliva dripped all around Han Feng's leg, he began to feel a familiar sensation. Then a loud scream echoed the entire apartment as Han Fong woke up from his hideous dream, breathing heavily. Han Fong was sweating profusely, as if he had just finished a marathon. He pondered, and what was up with this strange, disorganized dream? Right then, Han Fong's eyes widened when he felt the identical sensation he had at the end of his dream, and when he turned to look at his shattered ankle, he noticed that the green flame was covering his leg. Still in shock, he slowly, little by little, removed his bandages, and when he was done, he couldn't believe what he was seeing and feeling. His leg didn't hurt anymore. Not even a little bit. It had completely healed in just a few hours. Han Fong, beaming with curiosity, pondered if the green light actually helped with his self-recovery while he was asleep. Deciding to test it out some more, Han Fong grabbed a kitchen knife, and as he stares nervously at his finger, Han Fong brought the kitchen knife close to his finger. Then, closing his eyes in a half-assed manner, he made a small cut on his finger. Blood immediately started to ooze out in an uncontrolled manner. However, in the next moment, the green light summoned by Han Fong engulfed his entire hand. Then soon after, a smirk crept on Han Fong's lips, and from this scene it seems Han Fong's initial speculations were correct. Meanwhile, outside the apartment complex, some of the residents were shoveling the snow, while others also tried removing a massive broken tree that used to be in front of the apartment building. Here, the face of Glass Man Zhong was finally revealed, similar to his 3D animated version. Thanked everyone for their hard work. He also apologized in a polite manner to an old man named Lu Guangyao, but everyone knows him as Uncle Lu. Glasses Man told Uncle Lu that despite his old age, he came out to work in this heavy snow. Hearing this, Uncle Lu just casually laughed it off, saying he didn't do much. He pointed at the two young men beside him, the Jin brothers, and continued that they did pretty much all the work. The J brothers J Chin-1 and Jakinwu, who were shivering in the cold, smiled in a confident and shy manner respectively. They also laughed off the praise, saying it was their duty to help the elderly in these hard times. Just then, a loud bam sounded, startling the two, so as they turned to the side, they noticed that someone in a pink dress had slipped and fallen. The Jin brothers came to her aid. The confident brother of the two, J Chin-1, extended his hand, asking if the girl in question was all right. He proceeded to advise her to be careful since the ground was all frozen and very slippery. The girl took his hand, and as we got a closer look, it was none other than head nurse Jean of the city's hospital. She was wearing a hot pink coat with a matching earmuffs, so with a polite tone and a warm smile, she thanked the Jin brothers for their help and advice. Jen Chin-1 replied that they were going clear the main path first, so if Nurse Jean needed any help, she could call them and they would come running. Nurse Jean, known by everyone by the name Jean, thanked them again. She could take care of the rest on her own, she replied. Glasses Man, however, was still talking to Uncle Lu. He explained they would need to buy supplies quickly because the snow was steadily getting heavier. Hearing this later, he concurred. Uncle Lu smoked his cigarette solemnly and muttered that something had come to mind during their conversation. Seeing his serious look, Xianing asked what it might be, and Uncle Lu, whose expression now was that of a nervous person, just casually said it was nothing significant. He proceeded to say that he had heard for the past few days, an owner in their neighborhood had been bringing supplies on a small truck like he was moving houses, and that was a little suspicious to him. Glasses man, laughing, questioned, "Uncle Lo, isn't that a common sight? Perhaps that person was just moving into their apartment complex or renovating his apartment." Hearing this, Uncle Lu said nothing for a brief moment. Then, while holding his cap, his face again became serious. He whispered that he saw gas tanks and a fireplace furnace being imported in the building, and according to him, it didn't seem normal for someone who was moving in. As the old man said, it was as if the person was preparing for winter, as if the person knew what was coming at that precise moment. The J brothers broke up their heated argument by telling Zhang and Uncle Lu that they had cleared the main road and that maybe they should begin to move out. Uncle Lu now thanked them for their diligence. But then, at that time, a creepy, scary-looking guy grabbed the brothers' shoulders, startling them. He made mention that everyone had gathered around and were talking about making preparations to get through the winter. It sounded interesting, and he wanted in on it too. But before he could continue, a thick snowball hit him hard in the back of the head. The snowball was thrown by a woman named Lu Yan. She shouted at the guy Wu Kei Yan to stop slacking and come over to continue working. Hearing this annoyed Wu Han Yan, who started to yell, complaining that he did all the work alone while Lu Yan just watched from the sidelines and gave commands like she was a supervisor. Lu Yan raised her hand towards Wu's pointed finger and told him not to point his finger at someone while talking. Glasses man with his usual demeanor told them to stop quarreling. The main path was cleared and they needed to hurry up to get supplies. Hearing this, Head Nurse General shouted for everyone to get ready to head out to the supermarket to buy some supplies. The twin brothers also wanted to buy supplies for themselves and for their parents also. But Uncle Lu, with a casual smile once again, asked Glasses Man what his thoughts were on the matter. Glasses Man said nothing and continued to stare at his phone with a serious expression. And after what seems like forever, he laughing, replied that he wasn't overly concerned about it. It was a brief snowstorm after all and would pass in a few days when it does everyone's lives and everything would soon return to normal. As of now, he believes what Uncle Lu said wasn't related to the current weather. Maintaining his bright smile, Zhang pushed up his glasses and continued that even if they were to assume, the snowstorm doesn't stop and would only worsen over time, and if someone in their neighborhood possessed a huge amount of resources, wasn't that a good thing? Uncle Lu, scratching the back of his head, started to laugh. When he heard this, "I suppose you're right, it's true that the young ones indeed use their brains more," he replied. After a while, the snowstorms seemed to have gotten a little bit worse, so everyone including Glassman, had their umbrellas up. Glassman then told everyone to queue up and ready themselves to move out. They shouldn't push anyone. The snowstorm was getting heavier and heavier and they needed to try to hurry back in 3 hours when they've gotten the supplies. Soon, they all marched together toward the supermarket under the heavy snow. Meanwhile, an apartment from the lot had its lights on and it seems that this apartment was not facing challenges as the rest were. Inside this apartment was Han Fong, who was passed out, drooling and covered in sweat. His situation was a direct opposite of what was happening outside his apartment. As Han Fong began to twist and turn on his sofa, someone started calling out to him, knocking on his door. Han Fong woke up still half asleep, and as he wipes his drool, he opened the door. Han Fong apologized, saying he was asleep, hence why it took a while to open the door. At the door was none other than Li. Li had a smirking smile on his face, smoking a lit cigarette. He told Han Fong that he brought the item he wanted, a semi-automatic rifle, and just like that, Han Fong's drowsiness vanished immediately. Han Fong thanked Li with a polite smile, but Li replied that Han Fong shouldn't mention it after all. Han Fong was the reason why Brother Lu was able to properly secure supplies in advance before the situation had gotten this bad. Hearing this, Han Fong just chuckled. "Brother Li, you're too kind," he said. Suddenly, Li's demeanor shifted as he sighed deeply. Han Fong noticed this instantly and asked what was wrong, his voice laced with evident concern. Hearing the question, Li asked Han Fong if he'd heard of the supermarket in the East District. "Of course. I have. Well, when we went there in the snowstorm today to buy some stuff, the supermarket was completely emptied by someone. Last night what emptied out an entire supermarket in one night. Shock washed over Han Fong as he shouted in disbelief. However, inwardly he already knew this was destined to happen exactly like it did in his previous life or similar to it in his previous life. He heard the exact same thing and had his speculations. But with Li's confirmation, this news was serious and shouldn't be taken lightly. So as they parted ways, Li casually told Han Fong that he was heading back to his apartment. However, Han Fong shouldn't forget to wear more clothes to stay warm. Of course, brother Le, thanks for the advice, Han Fong replied, still lost in thought. Back inside the apartment, Han Fong shuts the door, not forgetting to lock it as well. Still in thoughts, Han Fong wondered who could be capable of secretly emptying out an entire supermarket overnight. How did they do it? He continued to ponder, trying to piece together the mystery. But the only thing that comes to mind were the comics and novels that he used to read back in the day. The ones about superhumans who could store things into another dimension and had the power to manipulate space. Han Fong had a gut feeling that it was more than just a regular theft. Could there really be someone with spatial abilities? Han Fong wondered silently, just thinking about the possibility that there might be more humans other than him with superpowers really unsettled the shit out of him. So as Han Fong clenched his fist glowing with green aura, he admitted to himself with determination. He needed to do more research on his ability. If there were really people like him out there, he needed to have some countermeasures as insurance. The pages of his book were filled with notes, sketches, and observations on different food items. Han Fong reflected, looking at the drawings of soybeans, broccoli, wheat, and even a slab of meat. His ability was undoubtedly unique, but the success rate was very low and mastering it was proving to be a challenge. On average, the soybeans' success rate in attempts were about 1/10, and when it comes to meat. On the other hand, while Han Fong hadn't had any success in that aspect since his first try, Han Fong reached for a soybean and readied himself to test his power once more. And as his hand began to glow with a green light, he couldn't help but wonder why his exact situation was happening. Han Fong waited nervously as the soybean in his hand started to react when the green light continued to swirl around it. Then seconds later, a volatile reaction occurred, ending in a burst of green energy. Han Fong once again failed. He was left holding a lump of the black substance from earlier, and judging from his reaction, it was evident that he was annoyed and frustrated. Han Fong crushed the black substance in his hand, determined to figure out how to use his ability properly that very night, no matter what. A while later, his table clock showed that it was almost midnight. However, Han Fong was still in his relentless pursuit, unwilling to rest until he achieved some semblance of success. Finally, after countless attempts, he managed to grow a fully grown fresh soybean plant. Han Fong was shirtless, sweating profusely. Clearly tired, he felt like he was dying, but all his efforts paid off. He had finally gotten a little knack for using the green light, but at the cost of having a significant amount of his energy drained, breathing heavily. Han Fong sat on his sofa, and in front of him was a pile of the black hole substance and 7 fully grown soybean plants, signifying his failure and success rate. With this, he'd made analysis on what he'd learned so far. Han Fong deduced that when using his green light, the energy wasn't constant, and every type of food has their own corresponding energy values, and it will result in a failure if its corresponding energy value is wrong. This illustration reminded Han Fong on something he'd seen with a similar model, an online virtual dancing game that was popular a decade ago. Han Fong started connecting the dots on how to apply this game logic to his energy control. He visualized energy arrows in the rhythm game style, each second needing the right amount of energy input. If the energy values were like the energy directional input arrows, then the energy inputs have to be correct for every second, and all Han Fong needed to do was pinpoint the critical points. Han Fong's hand glowed green as he focuses intensely to hit the perfect critical point. Shortly after, Han Fong channeled glowing green energy and nailed it perfectly. Perfect, Han Fong exclaims in excitement. In his hand was a healthy-looking plant. With his successful triumph, Han Fong moved on to the next experiment. Meat standing in the kitchen. A bowl full of some meat and another of soybeans was in front of him. Han Fong recalls his previous failures when it came to meats. They were different and significantly harder than vegetables. They also turn into a black liquid if they fail and were extremely disgusting. However, he thought the principal theory shouldn't be that difficult. So as Han Fong stood there shirtless, staring at a meat in one hand and a couple of soybeans in the other, he willed himself. First he tried to grasp the energy value that meat requires. Han Fong then activate both the red and green light together with the meat and soybeans, thinking that the time needed would obviously be longer compared to vegetables. Han Fong picked his spot and decided to go all in. But immediately as he did, his face was completely covered with the black disgusting liquid. That's right. The reaction had exploded in his face, so he tried again with a shorter time. Same results, then another one with an even shorter time than the one before, and again he missed. He then chose his longest time yet, and you guess it, another miss. Han Fong kept missing again and again and again. At this point, he was completely covered in the black liquid, fuming and shouting why it was so freaking difficult. On the other hand, his kitchen, which had become nasty with the black liquid everywhere, looked like a disaster zone. As silence ensues, when Han Fong had calmed himself down, he took a moment to meditate. Amidst the chaos, he tried to center himself and his energy, and once again, Han Fong summoned the red and green light. As he focused on channeling it into the meat and the soybean, the arrows flew around and the countdown started showing his intense concentration. Han Fong felt it at that precise moment. He was sure it was the right time, so he went all in and the results was a success. Finally, Han Fong had done it. He had successfully managed to achieve his desired result with meat as well. All sweaty and out of breath, Han Fong wore a smug smile, extremely proud of himself. However, all his attempts had gotten the best of Han Fong. As he collapsed on the kitchen floor with his big fat juicy meat lying beside him, he was drained and seconds away from passing out. His last thoughts were of how he'd finally found the synthesis method for meat, and with that thought, Han Fong lost consciousness. The scene shifts to the outside world where a major snowstorm has hit and was being broadcasted on television, updating everyone. They were just 3 days in and the current weather was the worst snowstorm that only occurs once in a century. Everyone was advised to remain in their homes and avoid going outside. Also, to ensure standard basic living for everyone, defenses and measures had been taken for all locations in the country. This woke Han Fong up, who lazily laid on his sofa. Tired, he leisurely listened to the news with pretty much no concern. The news continued that the disaster was widespread and efforts were being made to combat it. All means of transportation, electricity and network services were starting to break down, but everyone should be patient and stay home. At this moment, Han Fong sat up and stretched out his tired muscles, gearing up for another day indoor. He knew that everything would start collapsing on this moment forth, just as it did in his previous life, and the government would also continue to spread their horses chip over and over till all broadcasting cease. Just then, Han Fong's phone dinged. It was the neighborhood group chat. Already bored, he decided to check it out. In the 3D animated chat group, people were quarreling intensively. It was a complete shit show. Some neighbors were thinking of waiting for the government to save them, while others were skeptical and thinking about how to save themselves in hoarding supplies. But at that moment, Uncle Lou chimed in, asking everyone if they truly believe what the news said. Do you guys really think the news broadcasted by the government were true? Because if anyone believes that, then they got shit for brains. If the situation was under control, like the news said, and the government really wanted to save them, then trucks full of supplies and a support team should have arrived long ago. But as of now, not even a single one had been seen to aid them. On the contrary, from what Uncle Lou had heard from his friends, armored vehicles, heavy weapons, and tanks are heading towards their country's capital city. Based on this, there was only one possibility left: war. War was about to commence.
This episode of this manhwa.
Haona kept ringing his phone, demanding to know what Han Fong was up to and whether he would actually deliver the materials as promised. He just turned his back on her. The communications just kept coming in, but Han Fong didn't care about it. A nicely prepared dinner was set before him. He was in complete ecstasy and thrilled by the flavor when he took a bite. He was convinced, and the weather was too perfect for such a pleasant and warm supper. As he ate his hot dinner, according to Han Fong, he was able to verify two things as a result of the many experiments conducted in the last several days. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to make a complete piece of meat grow larger than it was already, since the meat had a natural limit to how much it could be expanded. However, during his experiments, he found out something interesting: a way around it, a loophole to grow the meat infinitely, and it was only possible if certain criteria were met. Holding a piece of meat with chopsticks, Han Fong explained that he can use half of the harvested soybeans to grow new seedlings while he consumed the other half. So with this method, he always had a continuous supply of soybeans. Now he found a way to apply a sort of similar process to the meat. Each piece of meat might return to its original size when Han Fong splits it into two and attempts to grow them. Therefore, half a piece of steak combined with a few soybeans can yield a whole piece of steak under the two types of light. On his TV, in the meantime, one news reporter continued to minimize the gravity of the situation. According to the reporter, the entire island was nearly entirely covered with snow and ice, and even the ocean was freezing so quickly that it was visible to the naked eye. Expert readings, however, indicate that the ice sheet has already thickened to a depth of 55 centimeters. This investigation confirmed that the catastrophic conditions around the equator were essentially the same in every nation. However, Han Fong was in his cozy flat, still dressed in his regular clothing, holding a glass.
If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments requesting the next part.
Glass of red wine and sipping it, knowing full well that the situation was much worse in reality than the media was portraying. Just then a shockwave that felt like a massive earthquake suddenly surprised him. The glass of wine shook in his hand, spilling the content. Han Fong immediately went to his window, pushed back the curtain to take a look outside. Staring at an explosion outside the city was in chaos. It was the 7th explosion in the past few days. Han Fong was curious as to what was happening out there with his apartment fortified like a turtle shell. Then, as the MC looked up at the sky from his window, he was startled by a loud vibrating sound. He noticed a number of military helicopters in the sky. In addition to being shocked, Han Fong was somewhat enthralled. Damn, so many helicopters. Examining the homeowner's chat group on his phone, he pushed back his curtain. Han Fong knew that the situation outside would undoubtedly cause a huge commotion among the residents and indeed in the underground parking lot. It was, as he thought, the homeowners were desperately trading for necessary goods and food supplies, and this led to many of them taking this opportunity to take advantage of others, which had also inevitably led to several conflicts. Even the ones who had donated their supplies earlier were facing the same problem at this moment. Glass Man and a couple others from the Interim Owners Committee appeared. He told everyone present that any resident facing difficulties should go down to their station in the underground parking lot to receive necessary resources for free. At this time, Han Fong had also made his way back to the basement underground parking lot, and due to his comfortable life in his apartment, he was still not used to the weather outside. So even though he was wearing heavy clothes, Han Fong continued to shiver in the cold and also sneezes heavily. From time to time, it was way too cold for him. Han Fong thought that if it weren't for information gathering, then he wouldn't have come back to the basement car park. As he walked further, he saw several homeowners waiting impatiently in a queue for supplies. Han Fong was surprised to see that the Interim Owners Committee was distributing food supplies to the residents. After all, in his previous life, this didn't happen and there was a rebellion in the neighborhood, and if his memory serves him right, then it was indeed due to the committee. But this time around they were giving away resources instead of scamming people. Since information like this was primarily why he came down there, he decided to find out the real situation. First, the panel showed a view of the chaotic distribution area from above with people gathered around piles of supplies, and as Han Fong walked through the crowded area in the underground parking lot, he noticed that the number of residents facing difficulties was quite high, which meant that the committee got a lot.
If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments requesting the next part.
Lot of donations than what they got in his previous life. Staring at the distribution point from afar, a person in the line furiously shouted that he handed over several boxes of supplies at the beginning, but now he only got this much food. Glasses man with a polite tone explained that everyone got the same share as he was given. The fat man in glasses was not having it when he heard this. Frustrated, he held out the little supplies in his hand and exclaimed for Glass Man to give him back the resources he donated. Zhang still maintained his polite demeanor and smiled, apologizing that the resources could not be returned. The disaster was ongoing, and he hopes Fatty in Glasses can think of the bigger picture. Also, once the disaster was over, he promised to pay Fatty in Glasses several times in cash. This frustrated Fatty in Glasses even more, who replied that no one knows how long the snowstorm will last. But at this point, the crowd reacted to the actions of Fatty Man in Glasses, telling him to stop causing a ruckus. Their big brother Zhang already said he would compensate him when everything returns to normal, so why was he still batching? He should stop being shameless for crying out loud. They even believe Fatty in Glasses never actually donated and just wants to get more resources. The crowd grew more agitated and someone even yelled for Fatty in Glasses to take his share and leave. Since everyone in the queue was waiting for their turn, another voice told him not to embarrass himself because supplies given out wouldn't be returned. The committee was already having a hard time, so why was he being such a pain in the behind? He should get lost. Han Fong looked at the scene, smirking a little. As things stood, he was certain that the committee would not return the goods to anyone. They truly don't feel ashamed after all the people who raise their moral standards and disparage those who gave more. Just then, someone spoke up beside Han Fong, unknowingly agreeing with his thoughts. The crowd was really shameless, he said, surprising Han Fong. This person was none other than Li with a tired expression. Raised his hand and greeted Han Fong. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. He responded with a smile, remarking how it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. How has he been? Not too bad. Not too bad at all, Li said. With a forced smile, he made mention that he was still surviving, but as he began to shake profusely, Li blames his trembling figure from being flustered and powerless. Han Fong then asked him if his current situation was what he referred to as not bad. Li explained that he had been surviving on water and minimal food for the past few days, so it's been a bit difficult if he was being honest. His stomach began to churn loudly at that same moment. Astonished, Han Fong questioned whether Li had actually run out of food. Yes, he said. He explained to Han Fong that he had previously considered aiding the less fortunate neighbors and had thus contributed the majority of his supplies to the committee. However, his food supplies at home ran out before the snowstorm stopped, and the committee provided him with very little food. Li continued that if he had known, he would have kept more resources for himself now. Even if he made a scene to ask for his supplies back, everyone present would start making a fuss about it. Han Fong listened to him curiously, then with a sly grin, he called out to him. Han Fong put his right arm around Li and asked if he could help him with something. Li, with a curious look, nodded, wondering what it was. What favor was his brother asking? Han Fong then explained that if his brother Li does what he's about to ask of him in return, he would give him 4 packs of instant noodles. This shocked Li Zi greatly, especially after listening to Hai's request. He questioned if Han Fong was really telling the truth. Han Fong nodded. Of course, he said. Don't think too much about it. I don't have much left in stock, but I can give you that much. Li started crying, thanking Han Fong. He promised to never forget Hai's kindness. After all, he'd already figured out that his dear brother was just looking for an excuse to give him food. Han Fong reassured him, replying that Li didn't need to be so polite. They were brothers and there was no courtesy needed. He grabbed Han Fong's shoulder, reassuring him not to worry. Still crying with joy, he promised that the small request was on him and thanked him, mentioning that Li could visit his house later to collect the food. Li happily agreed, then said his farewell. He was going to collect his share of the resources being distributed first, so with that he left. Han Fong, on the other hand, reasoned that with a few packs of instant noodles and sausages would eliminate the need for him to physically visit the underground parking lot in order to obtain information. He felt a little bad about taking advantage of Lee, but it wasn't as important as being at home, relaxing, enjoying delicious food, and playing video games. However, at that precise moment, someone loudly called out his name, catching his attention, and as he turned back, a flying slap came toward him. A woman in a red coat appeared and slapped him hard. This woman was none other than Lee Hyena. Han Fong was taken aback, wondering what had happened. Hyena vehemently announced that Han Fong had let her down, expressing her disappointment in him. The sound of the slap was high enough to attract everyone's attention, and the hyena yelling made it even bad, asking why his bootlicker had not been replying to her messages. But he was still in a daze, shocked that Hyena just slapped him. Did she just slap me? With a murderous look in his eyes, Han Fong placed a hand on his red cheek as he stared at Hyena. How she actually dared to slap me. I haven't even settled her previous debts yet, and she has the audacity to slap me for no reason. Did she think I'm that easy to bully a bootlicker? MC remained silent and tried his best to remain calm. As Hyena continued to shout at him, she questioned if Han Fong was deaf or was he mute. Did he not hear that his goddess was talking to him? After a brief moment, Han Fong sighed heavily, then apologized to Hyena. He didn't need to sabotage his plan before it had even begun, Han Fong rationalized. Han Fong replied that he had an unexpected situation, a complication that made him unable to deliver the supplies he promised. Hyena was shocked to learn that the supplies got stolen. Han Fong clarified that he put the items outside his door and then returned to his apartment to retrieve his keys, only to find them gone. Hyena then asked if Han Fong searched for it. Yes, he said, I did search for it, but unfortunately I couldn't find any clues at all. Hyena proceeded to ask if Han Fong still had some supplies left. Han Fong replied that he didn't have much left. His current supplies would probably last him for a few days if he only eats one meal a day. Hyena only heard the portion she was interested in and got excited, exclaiming that it was great news at this moment. Her expression was that of a soul devoured. Her eyes were empty, like the bottomless abyss, and not caring about anything or anyone other than herself, she told Han Fong that he could split his resources in half and share it with her. That way, they can both get through the disaster together. He just needs to eat one meal every 2 days, and he will be fine. Listening to this, Han Fong could not speak. How shameless Hyena was to even be able to utter such things was beyond his comprehension. Then, as a sly grin formed on his lips, he remembered. Oh, that's right, in her eyes. I am just a tool for her to use when needed. Her worthless bootlocker. Han Fong thought he agreed to Hauna's request, saying that he did promise her after all, they would split his resources equally. Hyena immediately started playing nice, thanking Han Fong. She also told Han Fong to deliver it to her apartment because she will be waiting outside her door. Han Fong agreed to this, adding that they should do it at night and he would send her a message when he was done packing. Satisfied with this, Hyena turned to leave. She will be waiting for his message, she reminded Han Fong. Additionally, since Han Fong needed to deliver the supplies, he should return as quickly as possible to avoid getting flu. Sure, wait for me tonight, Han Fong replied with a wave of his.
If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments requesting the next part.
Hand. Meanwhile, outside, the snowstorm was still getting worse by the minute, and back inside, Hyena was blowing up his phone, and same as before, Han Fong was neither replying her messages nor picking up her calls. At this moment, she was waiting impatiently by her door. Hyena wondered if Han Fong wouldn't show up again, so as she stared at the elevator which had stopped working, then up the flight of stairs, contemplating. Hannah was contemplating if she should climb the flight of stairs to Han Feng's apartment. Few seconds later, Hannah decided to do just that while internally cursing at Han Fong. If it weren't for the supplies, I wouldn't be looking for this bootlicker, she thought. After a few steps, Hyena was trembling all over as she took a deep breath. She was tired, and after starving for a few days, she only had little strength left. Almost there, she said, encouraging herself as she continued forward. Step by step, as she got closer to her destination, she noticed that the emergency lights up ahead were broken. plunging that entire section into darkness. She also heard sounds up ahead, and this made her question aloud if someone was there. So as Hyena continued to stare up the flight of stairs in the dark, unsure whether to return or continue, she heard the sound of something being dropped, and before she could see or figure out what it was, a loud bam rang out. The emergency lights turned on at that moment, and from the looks of it, it seems that the lights was not broken, just off momentarily with the lights back on. Hyona's current condition wasn't particularly pleasing to see her entire figure.
If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments requesting the next part.
Was covered with flow. She shouted, calling Han Feng's name. Han Feng, who appeared immediately at the scene, apologized to Hyena. He explained that he fell asleep and was in a rush down the stairs when he saw her messages. Due to this, he ran into a railing and dropped the floor he was carrying. Hyena was furious, asking if Han Feng was a pig. How come he can't even do such a simple thing like carrying a bag of supplies properly? Feeling disgusted with her situation, Hyena tried removing the pieces of the black polythene in her hair. Han Feng, on the other hand, just stared at her with a smug look on his face, satisfied that what he planned was executed perfectly. Han Feng specially prepared that food to use on her. He then offered the remaining supplies to Hyena, who readily took it, and as he opened it to check its content, she was displeased to find out that all the food inside were moldy, like trash that was not edible. Han Feng, scratching the back of his head, nervously said that he had to carefully eat to keep this leftovers in stock, but couldn't preserve them for a longer time. That's why they looked like that. Hyena picked up a piece and asked if the supplies was even edible. It was so dirty. Hearing this, Han Feng asked her to give it back if she dislikes and didn't want it, but Hyena quickly pulled away with a bag of supplies in her hand, saying she never said anything about not wanting it. This action didn't surprise Han Feng, who just stared at her expressionless internally. He laughed. So this is the goddess that I was pursuing with all my might, he thought. Hyena then took out a half-eaten apple and commented that although the surface of the apple had turned black, the inside should be fine and she should be able to eat it after she peeled it with a knife. Then she requested for the rest of the Florida too. Hyena was excited that there was still half of it left, amused. He just watched her after all. From his perspective, the supplies were garbage and he never even resulted in eating such garbage in his previous life. He was sure of Hyena upsetting her stomach for a few days if she does eat the garbage he gave her. Also, the current temperature was so low that showering in this weather was equivalent to flirting with death, so this meant that the flour would be on Hyena for a while. Han Feng thought of this as he turned to leave on his way. He felt something odd. It was as if someone was watching him. No, actually someone wasn't just watching him but also following him. So he immediately changed his route and decided to enter a floor to apprehend the culprit. As soon as he passed through the door, he hid behind it and waited patiently. Then suddenly, the shadow of the pursuer appeared at the door. Seconds later, a pair of boots followed. He quickly took action and grabbed the person by the jacket, then yanked the person on the floor seeking death. He shouted, and with a raised fist. Han Feng immediately halted his actions, startled.
If you liked this episode, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. The next episode of this manhwa will be released once this part reaches 1,000 views or 5 comments requesting the next part.
It was a girl, a young girl at that. Hey, are you following me? What are your intentions? Han Feng questioned, but the girl just stared back at him without uttering a word or making a sound. Realizing that the girl had no intention of answering him, he thought a little scare would be enough to get her to talk. So he put on an act of an old creep and said in a deep voice, "Oh, you don't want to say it right. If you don't tell me, I'll strip you naked." However, he was a little disappointed that this did nothing. As the girl continued to stare at him blankly, Han Feng soon gave up and got up. Realizing that the young girl might be clueless and doesn't even feel threatened with his act, he told her to forget what happened and this will also be the only time he'd let her go. She should just go home and stop playing pranks by spying on people. So as Han Feng took a step forward, he was again surprised when the young girl grabbed hold of his jacket. Turning his head, he questioned what her deal was. What did she want? But as she still chose to just stare at him, Han Feng told her to stop staring and just say what she wanted. Otherwise he would leave. Such weather this time around the girl just pointed in a direction ahead of her and again without uttering a word, "Do you want me to come with you?" Han Feng questioned and the girl replied with a slight nod, and with this Han Feng followed her and soon they came to a door which could be opened automatically provided you've been authorized. Also at the top right corner was a working surveillance camera. Seeing all this surprise, Han Feng couldn't help but wonder what was going on inside the apartment. Although spacious, was untidy with open boxes, clothes and other stuff littered everywhere. "Did you prepare all this?" The girl nodded again, so he asked the young girl if she knew that there was going to be a snowstorm. To this question the girl nodded again, then she finally spoke up. She said she knew there was going to be an ice age based on the calculations and result on the data she had. She then pulled her monitor on display to let Han Feng have a look. Seeing the chat ID in the homeowner's chat group, Han Feng immediately knew who she was. So with a surprised look, he asked for a confirmation if the young girl was indeed mysterious person in the chat group. And as he got his affirmation, Han Feng was amazed. "Why did you bring me to your apartment? Did you bring me here just to talk about that?" He seemed surprised and inquired if the young girl was indeed a strange member of the chat group. Additionally, he received confirmation. "You brought me to your apartment, but why?" Han Feng was astounded. "Did you bring me here only to discuss that?" Hearing the question, the girl just pointed to her numerous surveillance screens, and as MC also turned to take a look, it was something he never could have imagined. On the screen were surveillance on his hoarding activities. Every single one from the elevator to his apartment door, including the delivery and conversation with lies. Everything he did was recorded in real time. At this moment, he felt a bit violated by his entire effort to hide. His activities were a mere joke in the eyes of this little girl. "Have you been spying on me?" he questioned, like it wasn't obvious at this point. Without hesitation, the girl nodded again. At this moment, the young girl had taken off her clothes, and what she currently had on was only her undergarment. Our MC was dumbfounded, clueless as to why she would undress in front of a stranger. Then, he started to blush with shame and yelled in a terrified tone, "Hey, what's the reason behind your clothing removal?" The girl heard this abruptly and calmly stated that she was feeling hot. "No, I didn't mean that. That's what I intended to say. Put on your jeans again and stop removing your clothing." At this point, it was evident that the young girl lacked the necessary social skills to behave or talk normally in front of other people. She got into comfortable clothes seconds later and began to use her computer. And as for Han Feng, he was still trying to process everything that has transpired so far. And after a few moments of thoughts, he asked, "Were you spying on me because you became suspicious of my behavior of hoarding supplies before the snowstorm?" And to this the girl nodded. He then asked, "So approaching me earlier and monitoring me was mainly to confirm whether there is a possibility of cooperation between us?" Another nod followed when she heard the question, and with that, Han Feng then asked for clarification. What did she mean by cooperation? The girl simply put down her computer, got on fours on her sofa, and walked past Han Feng to the other end. He immediately panicked upon seeing this and asked in a panicked tone what she was doing. The girl with some sort of box at the other end of the sofa, totally clueless about personal space. Her actions were completely like that of a child. She then asked MC to teach her how to operate a generator. So after what seems like forever, Han Feng successfully taught her how she could operate it on her own. Then, he asked her if there was anything else she needed help with hearing. This she simply pointed in the direction Han Feng taught her how to use the geyser device. "You will get hot water by adjusting it in this way, but remember to close the valve after use," he said. Next, was to properly pack her foodstuffs into her freezer. Raw meat must be placed in the freezer and it must be unpacked. "You are being too reckless." Han Feng, struggling with the boxes, asked her to not just watch but offer a helping hand. When they were done, they moved to the kitchen. "Be sure to pay attention to safety when connecting gas and read my steps carefully. Check if the meal is ready. If it's green, it's ready. Only when there is enough gas can the fire be big and the dishes cooked out be delicious." So with the meal prepared and ready, Han Fong told her to always eat while the meal was hot under the current weather. Suddenly, all the frustration he had been feeling about his current situation finally got to him, so as he smashed the table in front of him in frustration, he couldn't help but feel like a babysitter. Gosh, I feel like I'm a full-time babysitter. Your self-capability is too poor. But to his surprise, the girl just stared and agreed with him. Seeing this, Han Fong immediately said that he was just kidding. He began to eat his meal while simultaneously crying inside about how tired he was. This girl seemed like a full-time job, so he decided to address the situation. Before things got out of hand, Han Fong turned to her and said, "Let me make this clear first. I will go back after eating." However, he was surprised to see that the girl had fallen asleep immediately after she finished eating. "Wow, I can't fall asleep while eating," he said. In disbelief, he carried and placed her sleeping figure on the sofa, then covered her with a blanket. After that, he got his jacket and quickly made his exit, commenting that the experience felt like he was raising a baby. A while early the next day, MC, who happened to be asleep, heard a knock on his door. When he opened his door, it was none other than the young girl. In front of her were some boxes she brought for Han Fong. Han Fong thanked her for her generosity, but also figured out that she needed something from him as well. The girl also happened to have wheeled her generator there as well, so she asked Han Fong to teach her how to operate it once more. They went to her apartment, and after a few days of contact, Han Fong was sure that the girl who lived upstairs from him was an absolute idiot in life. A lot of common sense was also very lacking, and this made living with her a nightmare. But at least she seemed to want to learn about life. But the problem was that he kept being dragged to her home every day to teach her like everything. Her cooking skills, although extremely poor, seemed to have improved, but even with this kind of meal, many people would still rush to eat it. But then again, under normal circumstances, I guess even dogs wouldn't eat it. He thought it was in this moment that Han Fong finally realized that he hadn't asked for her name, so when he did, she replied that it was the evil king's true eye envoy, like some video game character. Hearing this, Han Foot questioned himself why he even asked. After all, this girl seems like a handful, and apart from having keen observational skills and being smart with computers, she seems like a total airhead when it comes to having survival skills. Meanwhile, at the underground parking lot, it was absolute chaos. Everyone was fighting each other for resources, and from the looks of it, the committee's stability in maintaining order had evaporated as the homeowners tore each other apart for whatever resources were there. Each homeowner's eyes sparkled fiercely with fighting spirit. Though ragged and emaciated, they showed no trace of fear and were armed with iron rods and kitchen knives as they fought each other to death for what little resources available. Dark blood splattered on the clothes and the shoes of Glasses Man, as a neighbor nearby, was smacked on the cheek. The entire parking lot was like hell on earth, and Glass Man, who happens to be the only person there not fighting for resources like the rest, just watched everything unfold. Expressionless, knowing he needed to take action to control the chaos, Glasses Man took out a megaphone, turned it on, and caused a loud noise that drew everyone's attention. Momentarily, the noise was so deafening that everyone covered their ears. After taking a deep breath, he spoke up immediately. "Have you guys had enough? Have you beaten each other enough?" And as he said this, he helped the guy who was smacked on the cheek from earlier to his feet. Then he questioned the crowd, "Don't you think it's ridiculous that you all are beating each other to a pulp because of the last few supplies?" Hearing this, the fatty in glasses from earlier retorted, calling Glasses Man out. "You still have the nerve to say that it was you who proposed the donation of supplies, and now my family only received a pack of instant noodles to survive on for a few days." Another added, agreeing with what Fatty in Glasses said, "Yes, if we don't grab the resources available now, we'll starve to death." When Glasses Man heard this, he replied in a convincing tone, "Well, it seems I have to sort it out for everyone. Then the distributed supplies are not enough, and the donated supplies are also running out. So even if we grabbed the last bit of supplies, it still wouldn't be enough to last long." So just like I said earlier, it's ridiculous. Do you guys deserve to starve to death? Think about it carefully. Who caused this situation? You, the person, directly in front of him, replied from the crowd. Hearing this, Glasses Man just continued, calmly answering that it wasn't him, and since everyone seems to have forgotten, he would have to help refresh their memory. A loaf of bread that originally cost a few yuan was raised to dozens or even 100 of yuan by those who had ample supplies, and as he said this, he took a piece of bread on the ground and crushed it in front of the crowd in order to squeeze you dry. A loaf of bread is even divided into 1/5 or 1/10 for auction. Finally, they succeeded in making a fortune from the disaster, and all at your expense. And not only did you spend all your money on this food, but also started an internal conflict over the last few supplies. Isn't this ridiculous? They are the ones who have more supplies but never donated. They are also the ones who maliciously raise prices, and in the end, everyone currently present in this parking lot are the ones who need to starve to death. Is this fair? Isn't uniting during this snowstorm the most important thing for us to do? If it is, then why don't we do just that? Why don't we go up there and get back the supplies that belong to us? When Glasses Man finished his speech, a brief and complete silence ensues as everyone thought it over. He's right, it's not fucking fair. Why do they get all the benefits while we have to starve to death? That's right, at this point, the crowd was slowly being swayed by the Glasses Man. All that was needed now was a little nudge to direct them towards the other homeowners with resources. And that's what he did. Seconds after, it's all their fault. They made us suffer like this immediately. After those words were said, the crowd was completely united in attacking the homeowners they sold their supplies to, or any homeowner suspected to have kept their supplies and never donated. Damn it, not fair. We have to get our share of the supplies back. Yes, just take back what belongs to us. Satisfied with the current development, an obvious smile formed on the lips of Glass Man, who had once again successfully convinced the crowd to do his bidding. But at this moment, Li, who happens to be among the crowd gathering information for Han Fong, turned his head from side to side and foresaw the enormous shit show that was heading towards some of the homeowners upstairs with resources. These people have gone absolutely crazy, and he needed to notify his brother immediately, he thought. So with a serious look, Li took out his phone and texted Han Fong. Meanwhile, the snowstorm outside had not even slowed down a little. It was as bad as before and could only get worse and worse. However, inside his apartment, he was completely passed out at this moment as his phone rang a few times. So as he woke up to check the messages, he wondered if it was from Li, and indeed it was Li, and warned Han Fong of what has transpired in the underground parking lot. Brother, something bad has happened. These people had gone crazy, he said. They're planning on raiding the homeowners upstairs with supplies. Curious, Han Fong asked who Li meant by that, and that guy named ZNG. He is inciting the owners to rob other people's supplies. They are picking the locks of every apartment. Reading this, he immediately got up from his sofa, scared shirtless. He then asked for more details, like if they had already started or if they're armed. Yes, they are all armed. Hide if you can, but don't confront them head on. He replied that he understood, and Li Zi should also be careful. Han Fong quickly went to check his door locks to make sure they were completely secure. Then he went by the window to close the curtains. He didn't expect things to turn out like this, and although he's got 2 guns to deal with the crisis, it would be troublesome if this happens to be an organized action, because once his supplies are exposed, he would face every crazy neighbor. And if that happens, he's afraid that everything he'd hoarded would be eaten till there's nothing left. In short, he had to make preparations first. Han Fong grabbed some tools, 2 fire extinguishers, and a long cable, and immediately headed for his door. He attached the cables to the doorknob and at the same time completely insulated it with the help of duct tape and an insulator. He also placed the 2 fire extinguishers near the door, so as the Mick began to uncoil the cable, the lights in his apartment went off. In fact, the entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. Soon, the neighbors began to complain, questioning each other if they had electricity now, with water and electricity cut off and air conditioning or any heating systems no longer functioning. It was genuinely cold enough to kill. The homeowner suddenly turned to the property management team to complain, but soon found out that they had no signal. They also found out that the buildings around them were also plunged into darkness. Han Fong observed everything outside through his window. He knew that the snowstorm, together with the overload of electricity for heating, would eventually cause an inevitable power outage. In addition, the snow and low temperature outside made it impossible to repair the equipment. Han Fong decided to use his home generator he had in advance, so with maximum effort. Han Fong refilled his home generator with gasoline. He also knew that the power outage and internet outage may be permanent, and when the other homeowners finally realized that the electricity would no longer be restored, panic would surface, and their panic may lead to more serious riots and then inevitably absolute chaos, where the entire neighborhood would plunge into a scene similar to the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. And that's when the real hell would begin. Half an hour ago, Hyena had been fortunate enough to find someone to feed her. At this moment she was impatiently munching on a bowl of instant noodles. The guy explained to Hyena that he bought all the supplies from the homeowners in the group chat at 50 times the market price, and those poor idiots wouldn't shut up about how good of a deal it was for them. He spent more than 500,000 yuan on these supplies. He also put some of the supplies up for auction, and those poor people rushed to buy from him, so he made a small profit. In the end, the guy then touched Hauna's cheek and asked her, "How about you? Are you willing to follow me?" Knowing it was time to put on an act, Hannah nodded in agreement that the guy was right. Seeing this, he thought that as long as he has supplies, he could do whatever he wanted with Hyena from now on. But at that moment, he heard noises from outside his apartment door. Then soon after, he saw that someone was trying to pick his door lock. The guy stood up frustrated and wondered just who could be making noise outside his apartment in the middle of the night. He was totally unaware that the neighbors had all decided to raid his supplies at this moment. He soon heard the homeowners murmuring from the other side of his door, plotting about how to break into his apartment and if it was indeed the apartment of the person who bought all their supplies. When the lock picking seemed not to be working, they decided to kick the door, open the door. Eventually gave way, freaking the guy out, who started nervously ahead in disbelief, and at the door were the homeowners with their hungry faces and weapons.
Hey, quick fact, 97% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It's free, helps the channel grow, and keeps you in the loop. Thanks for your support.